Pluribus is back this week with the penultimate episode of the season, and with it being titled Charm Offensive, we quite literally saw both Carol and the others going on the charm offensive towards each other with the hopes of achieving their individual goals. Carol wanted to find out more about the others and add to her whiteboard of notes from episode 4, and Zosia was overwhelming Carol with a sense of kindness because the others wanted to distract her from investigating and finding out more information because they knew that she was never going to stop digging deeper. So with that, let's take a look at the deeper meaning of the episode, everything that we found out about the others and the joining, the themes within the episode, and I'll also break down that powerful ending. Here is Pluribus Episode 8, Ending Explained. Just to let you know, this video will contain spoilers. The opening scene. When it came to the opening scene of this episode, the first thing we saw was a point of view shot from the perspective of Manousos, and there were these singular drops of blood that were pouring down onto the floor. The vibrant bright red of the blood against the clinical white backdrop paired with the harsh breathing and muffled audio instantly set the backdrop that we were in the hospital and we were going to be seeing Manousos being treated following what happened to him. It almost matched the dazed state that he was in when we last saw him when the helicopter was coming to his rescue. We know how much Manousos didn't want the help of the others, which was made apparent throughout the entirety of the previous episode, so by seeing the others in this really close-up point of view shot, it symbolized how invasive what was happening for him and that he felt like he was being taken advantage of against his will. He didn't trust them to eat the food that they were providing, let alone be inside of his body with medical tools and trying to mend him back to health. We found out that the accident that he had with the chunga tree wasn't going to be debilitating because the infection that he had was responding to the antibiotics, but the others wanted to keep him in for a while. This is something that Manousos definitely didn't want, and from there was then an out-of-focus transition to the scalpel taking complete focus, and it showed that he was going to be resorting to violence in order to get out of there, and that's exactly what we saw. What was particularly interesting once he had the member of the joining at knife point was that he wanted to pay for the medical bills that he'd racked up whilst being in the hospital. Plus, what was haunting was that the others were just standing there and smiling. Every time we've seen Manousos, we've seen his mannerisms be that of somebody that has respect and is polite. He left a note at the storage unit when he left to inform people that he'd be gone for a while. He was putting bills on the cars that he was taking the gas from, and with this, he wanted to pay for the services that he was given. Whilst this wasn't necessarily because of his mannerisms and behaviours, I think it was more so because he was in denial about having to live with the way that the world now was. He wanted it to go back to how it was before, and he didn't want to feel as though he'd done any wrong whilst the world was in its damaged state. The complete opposite to Kumba. Manousos is a man of God, and we're seeing his devotion to his religion and its teachings in the way that he acts. During this scene, we also found out that he was in Panama, Central America, which meant that he was through the Darien Gap and was now able to resume his drive along the Pan American Highway all the way to Albuquerque, New Mexico. With him leaving the hospital, he took one of the ambulances and also supplies so he'd be able to treat himself along the way and head towards the border of America. Manousos was back on the road, his mindset hadn't changed, and he was ready to resume his quest to save the world with the eventual hope of having Carol Sturcker by his side. Our Time in Albuquerque. When the episode opened up following the title sequence, we were almost teased with the fact that Manousos was covered in blood on his travels and was washing it off with the opening shot that we had. However, we saw that this was actually the first charm offensive act that we saw taking place. Carol was making a drink for Zosia, and positioned in the center of them was the Belladonna piece of art, the painting which symbolized beauty but also something so deadly as well. This was the very approach that was going to be at the heart of the episode, being kind on the outer surface, but on the inside having ulterior motives. This was seen in both Carol and with the others. When Carol made the drink for Zosia, she not only did a kind gesture in making the drink, but she asked her if it was too sweet for her, and if it wasn't, she could always add more sugar to it. She was also being apologetic over taking the painting that was up on the wall, saying that she'd eventually return it and that she only took it because she didn't want all of the loose animals to end up ruining it. We were seeing a different side to Carol, a Carol that was completely different to before, and it was because she had a secret plan up her sleeve, to be kind to the others and, whilst doing so, find out more information about them which she'd hope would eventually lead to information about the reversal process happening, or at least if there was anything that she could do. Carol had gone on the offensive throughout the entirety of the show so far and had a hard exterior. She'd been aggressive, forceful in her approach, and she realized that all it did was push the others and the other survivors away. So by switching up her tactic, she hoped that it would make a difference. She didn't even bite at Zosia when she tapped into Helen's memories in knowing that there was a missing rook from her chess set, so it showed that she was determined to see this plan through. There was this sense of awkwardness that was present in the room, and I feel like it was like that because both parties were essentially being overly kind to one another, and for Carol, she didn't properly know how to dish it out or also how to receive it. Even though the both of them were on the charm offensive in this episode, there were moments of realness that were subtly exposed from Carol. For example, when Carol's cousin Henry was mentioned and she was asked if she wanted to see him, she chose not to because she said how he had 41 days to go and see her if he wanted to, and that never arose. So it tied into that feeling of loneliness that she did experience to a certain degree. When Carol and Zosia concluded playing the games at the table, there was a shot of the both of them standing outside of Carol's house, and there was a singular lamppost that was between the both of them. In my mind, this was the show subtly telling us that all of these kind acts that we were seeing didn't actually matter because there was always going to be that sense of division that would be between them. This was where us and Carol learned more about the others. We saw that due to their energy-efficient mindset and them wanting to do better for the planet than what the humans currently did, as many members of the joining as possible essentially slept in one big room. Around the world, they used stadiums, churches, halls, and places that could house a large number of people as places to rest. This is because it costs less to heat it and cool it, and this is also where we saw Zosia playing Carol at her own game. When Carol was going to leave, Zosia said to her, "Do you want to stay here? We can make you a bed, we can drive you back, you can take the car." She was just being overly nice, just like what Carol was doing in the opening scene in being overly friendly. Zosia was now doing the same and almost weaponizing the kindness. Carol actually stayed with them during the night as part of an experiment to just see what they got up to when they slept. And as we saw, there was a moment where Carol actually awoke during the night and had her arm on Zosia. I think there was a sense of realness to that, and it subtly teased the direction that the characters' relationship would go in right at the end of the episode, as they did end up doing more than just having their arm on each other during its conclusion. Carol has been on her own, and she's been mourning Helen in the only way that she can, which is by just cracking on and trying to reverse what happened to the world. But subconsciously, after being back with Zosia and then sharing a space with her, by her seeing that she put her arm on her, you could tell that there was a sense of friction within her mind. She doesn't want to betray Helen and also doesn't want to betray her own kind, so that's why I feel there was a look of confusion when she woke up and removed it. When Carol returned the next day, that was then when we saw her returning to her whiteboard and documenting everything that she'd learned about them. There was a moment where Carol was looking at her notes that were on the board for her 5th Waikaro novel, and she was contemplating about allowing her mind to go back into it, but she wasn't able to. In Carol's mind, these notes represent a time where the world was the way that it used to be, when Helen was around and when her life was in a position that she now wished that she could go back to. So there's something about her holding on to them and not quite working on them that ties into the fact that she's not ready to move on, and it's like a relic of the world before. Almost like how Manousos is always wanting to pay for things despite the fact that money essentially doesn't hold a value anymore. We saw this when she first used her whiteboard in episode 4 of the show. She didn't erase them, she just pulled out another board. One of the main points that got a focus on the board that Carol was writing on was the fact that they eat people. This got a focus because we saw that with Carol going on the charm offensive, it was almost humanizing them, and she was simply reminding herself of the monsters that they were at their core because of the fact that they were eating other human beings. This was something that was also brought to the forefront of the episode when Zosia said how they still needed to use trains in order for food distribution. This was actually quite a dark image. That very train that was going past in the distance, something that Carol loved, was housing dead bodies being transported around the country to be turned into a state where they could be consumed. You could tell that Zosia was reluctant to tell Carol with the way that she was acting, and Carol's reaction pretty much said it all. We also found out a bit more about how the others actually communicate with one another. It was revealed that there was an electromagnetic field within their body, which was like a natural electric charge. It's how the hive mind connects with each other. It's essentially an unconscious act like breathing where they're able to communicate and know all that's happening, not necessarily feel everything that's happening. Carol has one, but it's something that just simply isn't used. It's untapped into. This does actually make me wonder if the electric charge that the body emits is something that Carol is going to try and disconnect or send some kind of interference between. That way they won't be able to communicate with each other, so that could definitely weaken them in some capacity. Carol showing a sense of intrigue throughout this episode was all to do with her just wanting to find out more information about the others, and she was simply masking it with casual conversations and kind acts. The same was also present during the massage that both her and Zosia were having. Carol wanted to know if the others felt the pain of everybody else. However, that wasn't the case. It's as if they managed the connection to the point where they don't receive an overload of information, because it would essentially be too much. Hence why when we've seen acts of aggression against them in the past, it basically sends them into overdrive and they start to fit. When it came to finding out where the virus, which is known as the joining, comes from, it was revealed that it came from a planet 600 light years away called Kepler 22b. It's a planet that has twice the radius of Earth, and it could essentially just be one big ocean. The others on Earth, despite never knowing the people from Kepler 22b, love them, and are prepared to return the favor by casting out a signal into outer space themselves to ensure the joining continues to grow and planets around the world continue to be, quote-unquote, saved from the species. They're planning on using a giant antenna and using all of the power that the Earth has to offer to get the signal out there. It's their biological imperative to spread, so by doing it this way, they're going to do to other planets what was essentially done to Earth. Something that I do find quite interesting is the fact that the animals weren't impacted by the joining at all, and Carol even made a note of that on her whiteboard when she was collecting what she found. This is what makes me think that the signal was essentially created to target advanced life forms that impact the planet in a negative way, hence why the animals weren't affected. The climax of all of the charm offensive behavior that was littered throughout the entirety of the episode came to its peak when Carol was sitting in the very diner that was burned down several years ago, which she used to visit when she was younger and first started out to be a writer. We could see the mournful nature that she had in her eyes of thinking back to that time, a place of happiness and excitement and memories of people before. She was almost transported back to a time that now only ever existed within her mind, but the others had made it possible. This used to be Carol's escape, and she even said, "I miss those days. Those were the best days." So by the others taking her there, that was then when she got the realization that the others were literally doing to her what she was doing to them. They were trying to distract Carol and were being kind to her so that she'd be distracted from looking into how to stop the reversal and go against them. They were essentially trying to weaken her mind slightly. The fact that they rebuilt the exact spot that burned down flew in the person who used to serve Carol called Bree, who is now living in Miami and was recently married. Carol essentially saw how the people, despite being a part of the joining, didn't have their own lives like was promised by Tafla. Instead, they were puppets that were just used in any way they wanted at any moment. Carol saw the evil that was present and she couldn't keep up the front of being kind anymore, hence why she just drove away. Either that or she knew that by storming off, Zosia would end up driving after her and follow her to her home, so it could have also been part of her plan. When Carol and Zosia were together at her home, it was revealed that the others knew that Carol hadn't given up and that they were essentially overwhelming her with kindness just like she was with them. So this meant that the title of the episode was applicable for both sides. Carol felt like somebody needed to put the world right, even if it meant that they'd leave her again, and even if it meant that she'd be alone forever, which is what she would be, because even once the reversal was done, Helen would never return to her. So her world wouldn't go back to normal, and I suppose she is actually doing a completely selfless act here. This was then when we saw Zosia kiss Carol and they then went to bed with each other. Carol wasn't prepared to sleep in her own bed for the longest of times, instead picking the sofa. And then when she finally went to bed, having that sense of it swallowing her whole because she was without Helen was something that she definitely felt. But here she now was, having Zosia sleeping on Helen's side of the bed. It was actually quite haunting, but I feel I know for a fact that Carol was doing this simply because it was a part of her plan. Hence the look at Helen's grave later on in the episode. She was just doing what she simply felt needed to be done in order to try and bring the world back to how it was before. She feels Zosia could well be the key to understanding the others and beginning to look for a way back. On her Waikaro board, there was Love Potion that was written on it, and it was underlined, and as we know, Carol spent a lot of time looking at that board. So it makes me question if Carol thought that something like that might be an approach that she thought she'd try. When Zosia woke up, she saw that Carol had then begun to write her fifth Waikaro novel, the novel that Carol was always reluctant to dive into, but as we saw in this episode, she leaned into it and started writing it because, as Zosia said, the others were looking for something new to read, as technically they'd basically read every book that was on the planet. This could well be the perfect distraction that she's looking to give them, and it might well be why she decided to take to writing the first chapter and to give it to Zosia. Zosia even said at the end, "We love it," but corrected herself to say, "I love it." So it seems like Waikaro 5 and the changes that she made to the story that got Zosia extremely engaged in reading about it is going to be the very thing that she could end up using as a distraction. Just like how her memories and being taken to her favorite diner is what caused her mind to weaken. The others mentioned earlier on in the episode that they were excited to read something new, so in my mind, that's why the scene had importance, to have a ruse for Carol when she was getting the markers, but also because we saw that the others were actually happy and excited to see that Carol was writing. Just look at Zosia's face, there's genuine excitement there. 60 days and 8 hours. Once Carol and Zosia had their moment in bed with one another, it cut to 60 days later, and it seemed like Zosia was essentially living with Carol for the time being. We had a similar shot to what we saw when we were first introduced to Carol in the episode, but instead of making juice for Zosia, she was now washing some peppers and preparing to make an omelette. The radio was on, which in my mind showed that Carol was almost embracing the situation and world that the others were operating in, and she was still on this charm offensive, but she'd adapted the plan differently. Before, she never had the radio on. That house was silent, so it just showed that she was slipping into a slightly different mindset. There was a shot of Carol looking over at Helen's grave, and to me, that represented the fact that no matter how difficult the task was that she was doing it for Helen, the love of her life. Carol probably didn't like the fact that she was intimate with Zosia, but maybe in her mind she needed that to happen to feel like she could carry on with the plan in the way that she wanted to. I actually found this scene really interesting. Carol asked Zosia a question about what food the real Zosia actually liked, and in this moment, it was as if Carol was actually speaking with the real Zosia for the first time. There was a sense of captivation that was present with the way that Carol was speaking with her, and the story of the mango ice cream being her favorite food because it was from when she was fascinated with ships allowed Carol to see an insight into the real-life Zosia, the human before the joining happened, and there was a sense of captivation that she had. Carol even said to her, "Thank you for sharing," and it just allowed us and Carol to understand Zosia that little bit more, and it also showed that by speaking in first person, by saying I instead of we and Zosia, it instantly made her feel more personable and the mood and tone of the environment changed. However, the most important line in the entirety of the show arrived when Zosia froze and she said, "You're gonna have a visitor." This showed that Manousos was on his way and was headed towards Carol. I did wonder why it was that Carol was never told that Manousos was on the way, considering that the others that were near him knew where he was going, but I'm just going to put it down to the fact that they wanted to keep Carol distracted, so they were almost hoping that it might not have ended up occurring. Whereas if they told her that Manousos, the mysterious man from Paraguay that wanted to save the world, was searching for her, then her mindset from the beginning would have maintained. The final thing that we saw in the episode was Manousos in front of a sign that said Mexico border, United States, 31 kilometers. Manousos is about an 8-hour drive away from Carol, so it very much seems like the season finale might well see them meeting and the both of them then being in a position to work out how to reverse the joining in season 2 of the show. I do wonder what the response of Manousos will be like in seeing Carol. Carol will quite literally have Zosia with her when he arrives probably, and as we've seen, he doesn't respond well to the others. He's fearful of them and doesn't trust them, so I wonder if that'll make him trust Carol less, and he might be surprised to see how she's living alongside them, rather than viewing them as the enemy in the same way that he does. I'm excited to see what that first interaction's going to be like. My review of the episode. With this episode being titled Charm Offensive, the entirety of the episode was quite literally centered around the charm offense taking place. It was an episode that was filled with kindness, but had manipulation and deceit at its core. It was great to watch because I feel like we were watching a completely different side to Carol, even if it was a mask. And with that, it just meant that there was a real sense of awkwardness that was at its core. In terms of where I'd probably place this episode, in terms of comparing it to the ones that have come before it, I'd probably say that I preferred this week's episode to last week. There was just a bit more going on in this one in terms of the characters, whereas last week it just kind of felt like Carol was wandering around trying to enjoy her life of now being alone. However, I'd say the arc of Manousos carried it. This time round, I feel like the scene with Manousos during the beginning was immersive, engaging, and interesting, and then everything with Carol having a slightly different personality and trying a different tactic felt new. It was also nice to see Zosia back on our screen and to actually learn more about the others, what their plans are, how they communicate with each other, and the fact that they're also on the offensive just as much as Carol is. I thought it was quite clever. They can't harm anybody, but they can mask their kindness as a weapon. I would say that it kind of always felt like Carol and Zosia would have some kind of romance between them, but with the way that this unfolded, it was something that did surprise me. I didn't think that Zosia would be the initiator, and I did always think that Carol's mind would be warped into a position of wanting that affection and intimacy when she least expected it, so I was a little surprised. I've seen a lot of criticism about the show with it being called too much of a slow burn and that not enough is happening within the story, but I think that's kind of the point with this show. It's all about letting it cook low and slow so that the payoff and the reward is worth it. We live in a world of instant gratification, and with the likes of Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul being a prime example of shows maintaining their quality and arguably even peaking towards the end of their run, it shows that slow burn character development and quality storytelling and taking your time is key. I don't want this to be a one season and done just because it can be. It's nice to have a show that keeps you hooked for a long period of time where you don't really know what's going to happen within it. Whilst this wasn't the best episode of the show, and I do think the episodes during the beginning of the season were a bit more engaging and filled with a bit more action, it still made for a really enjoyable watch, and I think it set up the season finale in the best way possible. Now, I just can't wait to see Carol and Manousos meeting up. It's been teased to us over the course of the past 9 weeks, and I just can't wait to see what's going to happen. So, there you have it, Pluribus Episode 8 Ending Explained. If you want to see more videos on Pluribus, then check the playlist below. I break down every episode, so be sure to subscribe so you don't miss future videos. What did you think of this episode? Share your thoughts in the comments. As always, thanks for tuning into the video, and I'll see you in the next one.